Great. Thanks, everyone. It's a real honor to be here. It's such a great event, and I want to thank Kelly and Julia and also Cheryl. I said Cheryl, I think, recommended me, so if you hate it, blame her. And somehow people heard something bad would happen if you sit up here, but there are actually seats here. I will not be calling on you. There's no role play. Right, exactly. And so my title today is, If the Clubhouse is Unlocked, Where is Everybody? And we could modify that to, where is everybody else? Because you're like, we're here, and we're a full house, so it's really great. So before I answer that question, I figured I would answer a question that might be on your mind first, so that I have your full attention, which is, who is she? They're like, why did they invite her to be the keynote speaker? Are we supposed to know her? So I'm not one of the most famous or powerful women engineers. I didn't create Facebook. I'm not a multimillionaire, but I am married to a former Java developer. So I'm just a local professor. This is my 17th year on the faculty at Mount Holyoke College. That is 17th, so it was funny. It was like, just checking, just checking, are you on the faculty? And I have dedicated my career to this area, so what I really care about is making STEM fields more inclusive and more inviting to a wider variety of people. And so what I think I can offer is some insight into both why people go into fields, like go into the tech industry, and also a little insight into the people whose talents we miss out on when they don't choose, or when they're interested but then they don't follow through on their goals. And so I think I can give some insight into that. And so I've been pretty busy locally, so a lot of my research and a lot of my involvement, whether in workshops, whether with faculty or with students, has been in this local community. So I've done a lot of work with our area technical high schools and our community orgs and community colleges and a wide variety of places, both locally and at the national level. And so it's been a busy time. People seem really interested. They want to figure this, they really want to figure this out, this dilemma. And so I suppose what I want to say is you share, just I think by being here, commitments that people across the country share in terms of thinking about maybe young people in your lives, or I would say also adults in your life who want to rediscover or come back to a career that maybe they thought wasn't possible for them. And we want to think about how do we get more people involved or help people to go forward. And so I've been fascinated how, whether it's at, like I said, a local career and technical high school or at a highly selective university, people are asking some of these same questions and really trying to make sense of it. And actually, next semester I'll be taking my first international look at this of women in tech. I got a funding to pursue questions in Europe and trying to get a sense of how they're managing some of the same questions. They don't see women, they don't see lots of different kinds of faces pursuing the tech industry. So unlocking the Clubhouse. So people are trying to figure this out. So it's sort of, I was going to say, step one, it turns out locking the Clubhouse is illegal. So now people know they have to at least unlock the door. You know, you can't actually tell certain groups that they're not allowed in. So that's a positive. So we've figured out that part of it. But we still struggle to include many people. So I think the way we want to think about this is just, because we've unlocked the door, that doesn't mean people come and run in the doors and fill up the spaces. And I don't know if this sort of dates me, but this book came out actually 15 years ago, and the talking about leaving, a lot of this work came out, the Unlocking the Clubhouse, This is 15, 20, 30 years old, which can get depressing a little bit because you read these things and then you think, oh, we figured this out. We figured this out a long time ago. And yet here we are. We're still asking these questions. And so what I thought I would do in the short time that we have together is, because I'm sort of used to having lots of time, so it's a useful exercise to try to, show some restraint. So I've boiled it down to 5 lessons, and sort of the way that lessons of what we've learned so far. So it's like since the release of Unlocking the Clubhouse, and people are like, so it's a good book to read. It's, there's another book, They're Not Dumb, They're Different, which was one of the first books where they asked students why they weren't pursuing certain science and technical fields. And they actually had them take field notes of how they felt when they were in those classes. And this is written by Sheila Tobias, and I actually just gave it to our new computer science peer mentors, because sometimes what's hard to understand is why people don't want to go into this if we love it, right? So there's sort of this sense of, well, because they're not very smart, that's why, or, they just haven't just seen the light. And so that book, and that's over 20 years old. So a lot of this we should already know, and yet we still are grappling a little bit, even just thinking about who's in the room right now. Okay, so one thing we learned from Unlocking the Clubhouse, and this is in Carnegie Mellon and at other institutions, is that they used to require, or at least have as an admission criterion, that you had to have prior programming experience. And so if you didn't have prior programming experience, you sort of maybe went unnoticed. So if you think about that, that makes sense. So if you lift that restriction, or the sense that I'm looking for somebody who likes to take computers apart, or, I don't know what they asked them, did you have your own Commodore 64, or whatever it was, but, you like to play with it, and you took it apart, and then somehow that put a little marker on you that said, future, superstar in this field. And you can imagine, of course, with my interest in low-income students in particular, and being a first-generation college graduate myself, that sort of relying on being able to play with computers in your own house already sets you apart from other people. And so that may not be a useful indicator. And of course, I do teach at a women's college, and a lot of my work has focused on gender, but I think class is also a useful lens in terms of making sense of why that may not be the best way to go about it. So one thing we learned about this earlier on was to lift that as an indicator, and then lo and behold, we started to admit and go out and notice more women in particular. That was one of the big outcomes of that. And the other thing I want to really give a shout out to this group in particular is that although we don't want to require that you have had some programming or some computer experience, we want to provide as much access as possible. And so you want to get, so this is some images of students in these computer clubhouses that are really all the rage right now all around the country. Because the more kids get that in their hands early on, so if they don't have it at home, there's got to be somewhere in their local community where they can get experience. And then you have a way of really attracting and saying, oh, so when you were working on this in your local community center, it's not just did you have this in your home, or did your parent introduce this to you, because we know one of the biggest predictors is having a parent in the tech industry, of course, is a predictor of a young person going into that field. So if that is not part of your generational legacy, what are some other ways you can get access? And so I guess I wanted, maybe you were game, we would do kind of a round of applause. This would be the time we would do it, to say, a shout out to Holyoke Codes and a shout out to this nerd organization, because we really need these groups. So we hosted Girls Who Code, Black Girls Who Code, Go Develop It, all of these, and then there's versions of everything for Girl This, or, whatever the group is. We really need these organizations, and we need to sign on for them. We need to volunteer for them, and we need to support them, because they really are filling that gap, if that makes sense, that for students that don't have that within their family context, or if their schools don't have access to all of these things, there are places they can go, and they create these environments that are really exciting. And I'll say I, for one, when I posted the huge lineup for tomorrow, I mean, the numbers of people who said, I'm bringing my daughter to that, I'm going to that, I'm going to sign up for all of these workshops. Huge response. People are so thrilled. So I just want to say my applause for this work. But of course, that's not it. So the second one is that you need to walk the campus or the workplace with guides to uncover additional hidden barriers. And so it's one thing to provide the tools or the access in your local community, but I would urge you, whether you are sort of situated within an organization that is a startup or some kind of larger corporate environment, or in a higher ed or in a secondary ed context, to really think about, they call this, walking the campus and I'm going to describe this in a second. But let me just give you an example of what I mean. So in a lot of the work that I've done in the last decade has focused on community college transfer. And so a lot of the way that I've done my research in this area is I have community college transfers serve as my guides. And so a lot of what I do is I say, help me to see the campus through your eyes. What happens when you try to make the transfer from Holyoke Community College or Greenfield Community College into wherever you go next? And we've studied hundreds of students and lots of different higher ed institutions. So not just big research universities, not just cushy, really expensive small private schools, not just, so lots of different kinds of places where they've gone next. And there are some really common themes that come out. And actually can be quite devastating. The work actually can be quite devastating, because you might not know that women earn 500,000 associate's degrees every year, but only 5% are in STEM. And then if you really reduce from there. So the community college sector, in fact, we see fewer women than we even do in the four-year sector. And the ones that actually transfer, it's a very small number in the STEM broadly, and then as you reduce it within each group. So every one of the students, in my view, every one makes a huge difference. And so when you start to walk the campus with them, one thing we discovered is that students in their very first week are dropping classes because the books are too expensive. So if they look and see, the class I really want to take requires these 10 books, but I can't afford them, but this other class only requires 1 book, then maybe I'll make a switch to that class. And you can sort of see what might happen from there if that's the way that you're making your decisions. And so again, just sort of thinking about how income makes a difference, and how a lot of the work I do with faculty at different campuses around the country, it's really trying to raise that awareness of how it's not that you should change your class and sort of the goals that you have, but at the same time, students may not be able to afford that. And the other thing is things like this: why didn't you register if you needed the class? Well, at most campuses, you may not be aware, but transfer students often register last. So they're upper-level students, but they don't get into the courses. Now, there are universities that create special sections, and they hold spaces for transfers, but a lot of places will not do that. And then students show up on the first day, and the professor is sort of looking down their nose at them, saying, like, well, duh, why didn't you sign up? And it's like well, of course, because they didn't have access to sign up. And that's how they're starting their education from day one. So in terms of if you've ever done any accessibility training, it's sort of Access 101. So I look to this accessibility or disability studies literature because it's like, well, what's your problem? Just walk in. We don't say that to somebody in a wheelchair, but we say it to people who cannot afford access to certain materials. We say, what's your problem? If it's really your passion, you just do whatever it takes. Just do whatever. People who have passion, they just do whatever it takes, right? So I say that in this, you actually walk the campus. In this case, walk is in quotes. You walk the campus with somebody as your guide, or in your case, your organization. And if you say, why is it when I look around, everybody kind of looks like me? Then you get people who don't look like you. They walk your workplace, and they tell you what they see. And here are some of the things they see. They see brochures about your organization. Come here and join us. No, really, we want to diversify. No, really, look at us. We really do. Look at our wall of fame. We love those walls of fame, And what we know is that for many, whether they're young people or they're older people, whether they're men or they're women, People walk those halls and they're trying to get a sense of, do you really mean me? And are you really open to somebody like me? And what kind of person do I need to be in order to be part of this organization? And this is some of where they get the clues. So I say, one action step is you can change it up. I mean, so this is where somebody in their head's like, well, if a woman ever did anything, well, I have heard that. So if you think that, think it to yourself. But people will say, well, then I don't have any women to put on the wall. It's like, well, there's lots of other women you can put on the wall. And if you need help with that, that's the kind of thing I can give advice on. So a lot of people get stuck. They literally say, like, I don't have a single woman I could put on the wall, or I don't know anybody who's black who's ever done da da da. It's like, I could help you with that. So this is when you're like, people really invite her to come on and talk, and why is she so busy? This is where it starts to get obnoxious. So the next part is sort of, what's your reputation? And so if you think about it, there are certain places like this Menlo Innovations, which I can't wait to somehow worm my way into just walking their halls, right? You get excited about places that have a reputation. So one reputation is they do the pair coding, and I love just looking at those pictures of two people in front of a screen together, because for a lot of people, the reason why they don't want to go into tech is they don't want to be by themselves. Now, that might be why some people go into tech, because they're like, great, I don't have to talk to anyone, just me and my screen, right? But for other people, they're like, really? I'd be by myself? I'm going to start, like, who am I going to talk to? So this idea of the pair coding actually can be quite exciting. And this is a picture on the left of course, at Mount Holyoke, I've been partnering with our amazing computer science faculty. They're just so innovative, and they just do amazing, amazing things. And I'll just say what's really cool about it is we do have this new funding from Google, and it's allowing us to really improve and invest in our peer mentoring culture that already exists. Student to student, they started up a lot of this work. But we're able to do more peer code review, which basically helps you to figure out, are you one bug away from figuring this out, or are you a lot of bugs away? And I think when you just put it into a compiler and it just says fail, what we find is a lot of students don't get through that first introductory course because they underestimate, and certainly for women or first gens, students of color, there may be a greater sense of, if I am not really good at this, I better go find something else. I need a lot of indicators of success. And so the peer code review and having a little bit more support at the earlier stage can increase the likelihood that you're going to see more students make progress, or at least get through that first course and say, I really feel good about how I did in this. Like, I don't want to take more, but I feel good about how I did. And that's the kind of feeling that we want to have. And I'll just brag for a second and say, now that our wait lists are kind of off the charts, I mean, it's a good problem to have that the women can't get in to computer science. Not really. It's a little bit stressful, actually. And there was definitely a sense of a culture change, that if I go in and take these courses, the other students are not going to make me feel stupid. They're going to help me because they're really excited about the field and they want other people to be involved. So we actually have more computer science majors at our little tiny college than most of our neighboring research universities do. Okay, so the third one is we need to really broaden our sense of who can do this work. And so I think one thing I wanted to say about this piece is that I think we think we're all on the same page with wanting to open the doors. So this is sort of where, there is actually something nice about the Clubhouse that you can lock, that you only get to invite your friends. You don't really want everybody hanging out, right? There's something actually nice about being selective, I think. And I think in a lot of the work that I've done, I think this is the one thing that's tough to really tackle head on. And it's, like I said, it's kind of like your internal work where you sort of ask yourself about that. Because if you are in the field and there's not that many people who've done it or who've made it or who are doing it, it's actually nice to feel super smart, right? And feel smarter than everybody else. And I think that the more you start to open the doors to other people, the more that sense that you're better than other people gets threatened. So this is where, I'm an educational psychologist. So there's always going to be a psychological overlay here. So here's an example. So these are some of the quotes that students share with me, or certainly entry-level employees, sort of the sense they get. If you can't get through this material, you have no chance. I'm doing you a favor by telling you to get out now. Or I can usually tell on the first day who's going to do well in my class. Like, how can you tell? Right? I'm pretty sure many of my students have an undiagnosed learning disability. I'm not really sure what I can do to help them to learn. I mean, I taught the material. If they can't learn the way I teach, something's wrong with them. You know what I mean? Like, who's admitting these students? And I hear that actually from selective schools all over the country. I'm not talking about community colleges, because in fact, a lot of the community colleges, they're ready to teach in lots of different ways. And sometimes it's sometimes the most selective places where they say, like, what's wrong with these students? Like, you are handpicking the best students in the entire country. But they can just tell on the first day who's going to make it and who's not. So this is what people often hear. So you mean you've never used Excel to write a lab report? You never opened a keyboard? You know, like with a screwdriver, like opened it? You don't change your own oil? You don't fix your own broken headlight? Like, you know how to do that with a lamp, right? Like, what's the difference with a car? You actually bring it to somebody? Somebody in this room, you do your own, right? People in this room, you do your own? I bring it in, right? You can't sew on a button? What's your deal? You go to seamstress? You have somebody, you go to a tailor for that? Like, you can't do it yourself? What about finger knitting? So I have two kids, of course. So this is my 7-year-old, but I'll say this is a story from when he was 6. And he is a very, very proud knitter. Crochet, knitter. It's my mom, so the Chinese grandmas, teaching this, little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy finger knitting. He's very proud. So his little friend says, little friend in kindergarten, well, I want to do finger knitting. Will you show me? I could show you, but it's a bit complicated. And he literally, I don't know how at the age of 6, he knew how to raise his eyebrow, right? And kind of gave you know that look? I think, do you give this look? Do you know this look? I could show you, but it's a bit complicated. What do you think she said in reply? What do you mean complicated? I can do it. And she got this face. She literally got this face on her. She literally got this face, she's kind of like gritting her teeth. Like, what do you mean? So it's like this 5-year-old and 6-year-old. Of course, the way the story ends up, together, they end up in her kindergarten class teaching the whole class together, co-teaching this finger knitting to the whole class. Quite beautiful, right? But I think it's kind of funny when you think about it. It's like finger knitting. It's kind of complicated. And I'll be in meetings and they'll be like, yeah, I could tell you, but, don't worry your little head. We got it sorted, right? And I think people know that this is tied to the work on mindset. I'm sure, I don't know, in the room, if people have all read this work or you've done workshops on this, maybe. In our elementary school, the kids learn that there's that whole focus on this, where there's actually one of the classroom teachers, she sort of picked something she wanted to learn, so she was strumming the ukulele every morning until November. It started to sound like the ukulele, and really trying to show the kids that we all have things that we think we can't do, right? And the other part of this work in mindset, it's saying I can't do this, or this is hard, or I can't do this yet, versus I can't do this, or this is tough, but I'll find another way. And so the thing that I think that's interesting about this work on mindset is that if you're in education like me, you're actually kind of a bad person if you don't believe in this, right? So you have to believe that people can learn, right? So there's been all this, I think, all of this press about mindset. So if we could just get everybody to learn to believe in a growth mindset, that anybody can learn and improve based on wherever they are, then everything would be good. And so there's sort of this kind of hip hip hooray about growth mindset, like anybody can do it. But I really feel like kind of deep down, we don't really believe in it, do you know? So it's sort of like deep down, like, yeah, like, hey, yeah, you can go around the corner in room whatever and do your scratch thing, have fun. But like the real work, it's a little bit complicated. And only some people will make it, right? So it's sort of this like, go have fun playing on the computer, but some of us do the real work. So there's sort of this way that we sort of say, well, anybody can put their hands on, anybody can try it, but maybe not everybody's going to make it. And if you're not sure that you believe me, I've actually done this kind of a workshop with people where I ask people if they want to play a game. And it's kind of interesting when you ask people if you want to play a game, because the question is always, like, what kind? So some people get nervous, and then I say, you know what, I heard you really love role play. So I've got my banjo, got some instruments, right? And some people start getting all excited. Or I start bringing out the athletic equipment, and people start getting, and other people, like, their stomach is dropping, right? They're like, what is this game? Is she going to call on me? Like, what's going on now? Like, what's happening? And actually, it's interesting. Educators can be the worst at it. It's like, I hope she's not going to make me do something. She's not going to make me get up. And so when I show them, I say, so here's the game. And everybody gets this little assignment. It's interesting, because some people go, yes, like, I'm so good at these, right? Growth mindset out the door, right? And other people are like, I'm so bad at these. Like, I wasn't born with that gene. So I think it's interesting to think about this idea of how much do you really believe in growth mindset, whether for yourself or whether for others. And I think it's something, I guess what I'm trying to say is, rather than villainize people that are skeptical, what I say, it's actually human nature, that we're all a little bit skeptical. There are some things that we're proud of that we feel like make us special because we're better than other people at them. And people do say things like, I'm a natural, right? Or the worst, actually, is interviewing vice presidents who say, I'm not a numbers person. Don't ever say that. People are like, I'm just not a numbers person. Why are you saying that? Stop saying that, right? But then we say things like, oh, well, some people are just not tech people, or, some people just don't think that way. I'm not saying that some people don't lean one way or another toward a preference of certain activities they like or that come more easily to them. But I think we too easily decide that some people can't do things based on how they show up the first day. And for that, I just want to say I've been involved heavily in a group called Engage in Engineering. This is another National Science Foundation funded project. And what they have done is worked with dozens of the top colleges of engineering. And some of what they found, much like the Unlocking the Clubhouse, is they found that the spatial visualization, in particular for women, but for many students, if they didn't have a baseline proficiency in it, then they could not make it in the engineering curriculum. And I've actually worked with numbers of schools that students want to go into chemistry or some other field, and they don't have the base mathematics, background. And what they do is they screen them out. So in some schools, they actually just let you fail. In other schools, they screen you out and don't let you go forward. So I don't know if you're aware of that. So they have you take a pretest, and if you don't pass it, they just screen you out. And so what Engage in Engineering did is, working with a lot of these top schools like Ohio State, is they created a spatial visualization class, because you actually can learn. There is a little part of me that feels like it's not true, but then I look at the data, and since 2000, this Charles Sorby, who's really amazing, and has been an engineering educator for many years and has taught this work, sure enough, just meeting 1 hour a week, students get better at it, and then they saw dramatic changes in the numbers of women and just overall students progressing through engineering. So rather than just say, oh, I can tell on the first day who's not going to do well, it can be, I can tell on the first day who might need something else before they can then ramp up. But instead of being told they can't do it, there's an option in a way, and it is research-based, not just wishful thinking. Along this along these lines, I would say one action step you can think about is to analyze how you give feedback. And so if you are a teacher, or if you're a manager, or if you're a coworker, or you're a parent, you can think a little bit about how often you say things like, wow, you're really smart, or some people are not tech people, or some people just don't think that way. They don't, you weren't born with that gene, or Mama's not very good at that, ask somebody else. Or Dada's also not good at that, or whoever, grandma. Offer an action step and notice the process. So what they really recommend is really noticing steps and strategies, and that can be very motivating to all people. If there's a sense that there's something you must be born with, then what's the motivation to ever try to do something different? But if you actually look, like just for a day, if you just sort of monitor how often you say things like, I'm not good at that, or I've never been good at that, I could never do that, it's interesting, or I've always been good at this, I'm just a natural. It's interesting to see how ingrained that is and how we explain things. Okay. The fourth is that mentoring is more than cheerleading. So this is something that in terms of my own work, I've studied the nuances in mentoring for many years. And so I don't want people to get kind of riled up about this, but so when we hosted the Girls Who Code, she said, of course we have a lot of corporate sponsors because we provide mentoring. So there's a lot of these organizations that say sign on as a mentor or give money. And people love to see their company sponsoring, right, different kinds of events. And part of what she says is because the real work of mentoring is harder to do, right? It's kind of easy to sign on, say like, I really support this initiative. But when I start to give you a few examples, you'll see what I mean. So I say mentoring in the form of cheerleading sometimes is the easiest type. Like, you can do it, right? Like, you can do it, and then there's like 10 people, and they're all cheering, in unison, like, you can do it, and that's great. But then if you're lost, and like, you know what I mean? Like, nobody's really helping you, and you don't have the skill, like, all that cheerleading is not really going to help you. So I have this story for you. So I don't know how many of you go to a gym or, well, let's just use this example. I won't say, something else. But so if you go to the gym, and so I joined a new gym and struck up a little conversation with somebody on the treadmill next to me. And I said, I kind of like this person. So we'd see each other just at the gym and, hello and hi and how's it going? And so I started learning about this person. And, apparently her sister was really down on her luck. And I'd hear these stories and it's just like, wow, that's really tough. You're such a great sister. And, we're sitting there doing the weights and doing the jogging. And then one day she says to me, so your husband's at Mass Mutual, right? Yeah, and like it sounds like he's had such a great experience working there. I said, he has. My sister, the one I've been talking about? Yeah, I was thinking maybe your husband would circulate her resume because it sounds like Mass Mutual would be a great company for her to work at. So anybody kind of have the feeling in your stomach? Yeah, if you don't have that feeling, we can talk about it later, like why you should have that feeling, right? Okay, so like you're gonna get that phone call, so we do a lot of references. So it's a lot of this, I call it, will you vouch for me? And when you get that phone call and there's certain people like, oh my gosh, yeah, I wanna tell you all about this person. And you just there couldn't be enough pages. There's not enough time for us to talk about how great this person. Other people, it's like, who? Hold on. And then you're trying to think in your head, can I vouch for this person? And in a lot of the work that I've done actually with professional women around networking, there was a group that was launching a new an approach of small group mentoring. And what the women who had signed up, who were all very successful professional women, some from the environment or from the tech industry, or they were lawyers or they were engineers, they, it's not that they needed the mentoring or there was something that was going to go wrong for them. But they really said, the reason why I'm signing up is I'm hoping I get a mentor who will introduce me to some high-level people or, quote, will open their contact list to me. And I thought it was kind of interesting, so when I did the kickoff for that group, we did something like this, a little exercise. And it's thinking about, hey, I was thinking about doing a bathroom remodel. Hey, Benji, could you tell me who you used? well, I wish I could tell you, but I didn't really like the work they did. Right? Then the next person, hey, could you tell me who you used? And it's like, yeah, they never really finished the job. I really don't feel like I could endorse them, right? Or, hey, I'm gonna have an anniversary dinner. Sven, where should we go? Yeah, I really don't feel like I could recommend because, right? So there's a way that we are nervous about using our reputation for something as small as where to go to dinner, because you're like, well, I don't want to tell you to go there and then you have a terrible experience, because I kind of remember that one of the dishes was a little bit overdone. And so then if that happens to you or worse, then what are you going to think about who I am? Like, oh, well, Becky really likes that place. Don't ever ask her. She has no good taste in restaurants, right? Or you recommend somebody to do some work on your house or whatever the thing is. And so I find it interesting with the will you vouch for me. But one of the biggest wishes people have about mentoring is that somebody's going to really invest in you and they're going to introduce you to their contacts and you don't even know them, right? And so this is in terms of people are thinking about training for entry level or for students or new managers or whatever the group is. It actually is kind of this chance to think a little bit about what's involved to put your own reputation on the line for another person. And what we know from the research, of course, is we're more likely to vouch for people who are like us, where we're like, I can just tell you're going to be a good fit, right? I can just tell. Like, we just get along. Like, I just hire you. Do we need to do a search? Because I already know the best person. Why do I need to call anybody? Why do we need to do outreach? We already know who we want to hire, right? So it's that kind of feeling. And what I'm saying again is this is also part of human nature. And at the same time, I guess what I want to say to you is we're not willing to take risks on people. How do we expect things to change? So if somebody is a little bit different from us or they don't present in the way that shows to me the best first step or whatever I think that's going to look like, then how do I expect the composition, of this room or, all of our workplaces to change? And I remember actually a time when, so I hesitate to always tell this story because it sounds like I'm like advertising on who knows where for babysitters for my kids. But so I'd advertise for babysitter, and this amazing person writes me and says, oh, I want to tell you about my childcare experience. And then she goes on to talk about being a community college student and all of her leadership work and all the things that she had done. And of course, I said to her, well, listen, you sound like a great babysitter, but I'm actually doing a research project on community college transfer. Would you like to interview to be my research assistant? And she did, and she ended up choosing to go to Smith instead of Mount Holyoke, but that's fine. We got over it. So she transferred. She did an internship at Harvard Medical, and she's doing her PhD now. This is somebody, with a very hard life that she had going through. And it's interesting to think about just those moments when you're kind of like in your head, like this is a little bit crazy, but I know you applied for this position, but I was thinking you'd be great for this other one, and you might need some additional coaching, but I think it's worth the risk. So I think it's some of like asking ourselves why we're so reluctant to put our reputation in line, especially people with really good reputations. Like, so what's going to happen if I make, a recommendation and it doesn't turn out? We don't always know how things are going to turn out, right? And I think my reputation is pretty intact. Like, what's going to happen to me? Not a lot's going to happen to me if here or there it doesn't quite work out. And that can happen even with, quote, sure things. So I say make a list of 10 people you'd recommend, analyze that list, think about its features. So if I really go through my list and say, I can't think of somebody, when I sort of look at that list and I say, everybody's kind of like me, is there anyone on that list? So I just start to think about, why is that? And are there people in my organization or on my team that I could be investing in now, or finding ways for them to grow in the areas where they are lacking so that a year from now I can recommend them? And I think that's part of this, well, I can't generate any names. Well, why is that? And that's where I really say, are you willing to take that kind of a longer view? I think the last exercise in this one is about, will you coach me? And just briefly, if you think about, so this is Alyssa, who was an Olympic swimmer. So this is just, again, the idea is that I hired this person, they were, in the military and they had accolades. There's certain features of people that say, I can't wait to coach that person. So when they struggle, you say, I know you can do it because. And then if you just change the situation, Alyssa went through a difficult divorce before coming back to college. She's been raising her 2 children on her own. Now all of a sudden we're not sure. So when Alyssa, I kind of wasn't sure about Alyssa, but I made that hire, and now I'm not sure about her. So it's part of this really examining inside who we're willing to take a risk on and who we're willing to vouch for. And can we get a little bit uncomfortable about that and push our comfort zones? And like I said, if there's some reason why you cannot recommend them, are you gonna just wait till somebody asks you and privately on the phone give all the kind of, reservations you have about them? Or do you actually tell them, here are some of the things that you need so that I can endorse you more positively? And I guess toward that end, I'll just say, giving tough feedback constructively, it's a talk in and of itself. But in terms of my own trajectory, as a first-generation college student and working on a summer research project, I had a professor where, right in the beginning, I made a mistake, and I was in this special program for first gens and students of color, and he really took me aside and said, "This work is not good enough. You really want it." And it was the best thing he ever did. He didn't give up on me. He didn't just smile at me and say, "Well, that was a nice summer experience." And then when I go looking for a reference, he can't write it. Right? Or he writes one that has all these flags embedded in it, because I'll never see it, right? Instead, he went to me head on and said, "This is not going to be good enough. I want you to redo it. Here are some things that you can do to improve the quality of the work." And I would say at each stage, you don't, and part of it he later said, I knew your mom had worked at McDonald's. I knew you were rough around the edges. Your writing was not strong. You didn't present as the strongest student. I wasn't sure. That's hard to hear, but I'm grateful that he dug in and gave me some tough feedback that I was able to then not wonder why I never got the reference from him, but instead I got a really strong reference, and that led me on my path. And I'll just say there's some evidence even Google engineers appreciate their managers. So they tried, no managers, and they had managers, and then they studied it, and they really love it when the manager reveals a roadblock and tries to help open it up. So it doesn't have to be critical feedback, like you're not good at this or that your work is crap, But it can be much more, what's standing in the way between, this next rating, in your performance? It's that you need to improve your public speaking, or you need to improve the way that you interact with senior leaders. And I want to provide some opportunities for you to grow in that area. So it can be much more of an opening for people. And the last comment or lesson that we've learned from all of this work in the last couple decades is the realization that even when certain toxic comments are not directed at us, they still affect everyone. It's good to have girls because we need them to make websites look pretty. How can people expect to succeed if they don't speak English? Jim just doesn't fit in. He never laughs at my jokes. He's so uptight. Well, we hired our African-American colleague to be a role model to our students of color. Why doesn't she go to any of their events? I don't get it. Isn't that why we hired her? And so what I want to say about this, and again, I think each of these could be its own thing to dig into. A lot of people say, we got to call out that behavior. And one piece that I read about this is going away from the language of calling out, because the reality is we need to keep working together. And so if you're working with somebody, in the workplace, and you're going to keep doing that, calling them out and humiliating them, that's one strategy and it's one approach, sometimes well-deserved by the right person. But I also like this metaphor of calling people in, calling them into a conversation where we agree on the kinds of norms, the kind of reputation, the kind of energy we want to have. And so then when we see ourselves going in a certain direction, we can kind of steer that conversation like, I think I'm hearing you say this, and I'm kind of wondering, or, yeah, no, we do need to do a search because, or this kind of steering the conversation, gently nudging people, or like I said, calling people into a conversation to say, we do want to have a workplace where people feel excited to come with their whole selves. And that's really the type of place that we want to be. And so therefore, do these comments really fit in, and not overlooking them? And I think there's a lot of people with privilege and power that just say, that's that person's personality. Oh, that's just how they are. It's like, no, that's not actually how they are, and we don't like it. So I think there can be some of that, we don't like it, but it doesn't have to be a shaming type of approach. So in terms of the takeaway messages, one is unlocking the door. Yes, it's a first step. You provide access to tools and practice. And again, just kind of a shout out for this entire conference and all of the work that is going on in this organization, because without it, we really can't expect people to get the kinds of exposure and hands-on experience that we want from a wider variety of people. You can ask guides to show you which barriers they see and share insight into your reputation, and you can change those walls of fame. You can challenge who can do this. Yes, it's complicated, but show me anyway, right? It's like, yes, it's complicated, but show them anyway. And then go beyond cheerleading. Will you vouch for me? Will you coach me? Or only certain people? Because we know that there's only certain people that tend to make it, actually, even in terms of the hiring of computer science professors, we can trace it back to typically 3 institutions where they went to school. And then the last one, try to call in a colleague to the benefit of your whole department or organization, and really ask yourself, is this the kind of place where I want to work? And then how can I gently steer us in the right direction? And I guess the 6th one, even though I said there were only going to be 5 lessons, is I just want to say there is one more that's so important when you're doing this kind of work, and that's to let the promise of the future inspire you. And I think that this is something for me. These are some of my students that I've worked with. They're the ones whose life paths have been more complicated than mine. And when I look into their faces, I see the future. I already see the first minute I meet them. I know there's going to be something amazing for them. And so it's not just about investing because it's a good thing to do. It's actually because it fuels us. So if you let some of that awesomeness of, changing someone's life, which can just be through a comment or noticing or being willing to introduce somebody to someone else, I say to you, when you look around tomorrow, it's really not just about unlocking the Clubhouse, it's taking that extra step. And along the way to remember, the part of why we're doing it is not just for those young people, it's really for us. And that we get so much out of it. And I know, at least for me, when my students show up with their full selves, then I want to show up with my full self and do even more in this area. And I will just say thanks again, because I'm inspired by everything that you're doing in this organization and the fact that so many of you were willing to show up today. Thanks.